And I want to come back to that opportunity for growth for a minute, but I want to talk specifically about the issue of men's violence against women as one of those different issues that you all will hear about and will deal with in one way or another. And how I got involved in doing this work. As Dr. Ert said, I was involved as a student athlete with Athletes Against Drunk Driving. I got involved in different kinds of programs, and I was very involved in the issue of racism in sports because as a quarterback, I dealt with the black quarterback issue in the NFL and even in the Canadian League, and that was my issue. That was something that I was interested in talking about. I ended up at Northeastern University at the Center for the Study of Sport and Society, and it was there that I started doing work specifically around men's violence against women. Sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape, date rape, teen dating violence, all those different categories of what I refer to as men's violence against women. It wasn't something that I went there looking for, like this was going to be my issue. This was something that I had experienced as a child, something I was keyed into. It was because of a program of training student athletes to work in the community. And when I learned about all those different categories of what we call men's violence against women, sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape, date rape, teen dating violence, is that all those different categories of men's violence against women have two very important things in common. And let me just pause for a second and say that I'm going to, what's going to sound like, talk specifically to the men. But that's part of the point. And I'm going to ask some questions. And I know it's a big room and the light, I can't really see everyone, but I'm going to ask some questions. And I would just hope that we can respond. I know it's a big group, but respond in ways that are respectful and in the group. But all those different categories of men's violence against women have two things in common. First and foremost, they all involve men committing acts of violence against women. Sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape, date rape, teen dating violence, all involve men committing acts of violence against women. In fact, if you think about violence as a whole, if you heard that there was a student in a high school not too far from here with a gun in the cafeteria, would anyone in here assume that that student was a girl? If we found out it was a girl, what would our response be? Shock. We'd be like, what? What? We would like, should we be an after-school special in a month, right? Like, why did she lose her mind? What happened to this girl? How'd she go from the sweet little girl to this, to this murderer? I would say like Tina the gun-toting teen. That would be the after-school special. And we hear about it every day. We hear about domestic violence, sexual violence, school violence, youth violence. What we don't call it is specifically what it is, and overwhelmingly, predominantly male violence. And specifically when you talk about violence against women, sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape, date rape, teen dating violence, all those different categories of violence against women, overwhelmingly 90% of violence committed against women is committed by men. So the first thing that all those different categories of violence against women have in common is that they all predominantly involve men committing acts of violence against women. So when I talked earlier about having an honest discussion about different social issues, that's one of the first things we have to be honest about when we talk about violence prevention. The second thing that they all have in common is that historically, they've all been considered women's issues. So here's another question to the men. If we call them women's issues, what does that allow us as men to do? Men. Ignore them. It's not my issue. It's not my problem. Right? Like I told you, I went to Northeastern because the issue of black quarterbacks in the NFL and racism in sports was my issue. And it was something that I learned that all these different forms of violence against women are my issue as well as a man. I was going around the country saying that violence against women is a men's issue because it impacts the women in our lives that we care about. I was living that and didn't know it. I was dating a woman at the time who had been drugged and gang raped. I never knew. And the reason I never knew was because these are all issues. Violence, alcohol, drug use, different social, personal issues. These are all issues that we've all been raised not to talk about. You don't talk about the violence in your family. You don't talk about the drug use in your family. You don't talk about the alcoholism in your family. You know what happens when we remain silent about it? We allow it to get passed from one generation to the next. If you go to my hometown and you go to the barbershop where I got my hair cut just a couple of days ago, you'll see my picture on the wall of the barbershop, you see my brother's pictures on the wall, and you hear about the McPherson family. They say, oh, the McPherson family, that's a cool family. They don't deal with these kinds of issues. My oldest brother played in the NFL for the San Diego Chargers, now has a huge church out in San Diego. I have another brother who's ranked 4th in the world as a middleweight boxer. 2 sisters, real popular growing up. My mother's a school nurse in the middle school. My father was a cop, used to watch the fence at the football games. And they'll say the McPherson family, they don't deal with these kind of issues. And that's nonsense. It's a lie. I have a grandfather I never knew. I was always told my whole life that my grandfather died in a car accident. No, my grandfather died drunk in the car by himself. He was an alcoholic. But we never talked about that. I had another uncle, you know, everybody has that cool uncle. He's the one that cuts up on your father, right? Real funny guy. Real cool, funny guy. My cool uncle and aunt stopped coming to holidays together. Never knew why they stopped coming to holidays together. They got divorced. We definitely didn't talk about divorce. But we most certainly didn't talk about why. My cool uncle, alcoholic. You know what happens when you don't talk about your uncle? You don't talk about your grandfather, you don't talk about your uncle? My one brother I mentioned a moment ago, boxer, alcoholic, addict. Functional, like a lot of addicts. But because we saw things happening and chose to remain silent about it and not confront it, not say something when we knew something bad was going on, we knew that it was in our family, again, not wanting to address our own stuff, our silence allowed it to get passed generation to generation, bless you. And now passed on to his kids. And that's why I say that we have to speak out about things that we see going on and recognize that it impacts us all. And that's why I say that violence against women is a men's issue, because it impacts the women in our lives that we care about.